This whole thing is a vision of Chanakya. It is the vision of Kautilya. And the intelligence and vision of Kautilya is difficult to understand. It cannot be understood. The Arthashastra is like an encyclopedia of ancient India. Nothing is above his vision and nothing is below his vision. He will tell you how much to eat every day. He will also tell you how to fight with the neighboring king. He will tell you what clothes to wear, what jewelry to wear, everything. So, looking into the mind of Kautilya via the Arthashastra is an absolutely fascinating experience. Why do I mention Kautilya? Because I'm talking about administration, Amatya. And Kautilya was the Amatya par excellence. You cannot get better than that. At the time of independence, there was this hatred for everything that was old and ancient and Indian. So it was bad and let's forget about it. And it's Brahminical and we don't want to read Brahminical texts and it's all useless, it's all old. It was the first time that anybody in the Western world thought that, oh, okay. So they also thought about political science. Oh, they had some theories about economics. They used to levy customs duties. Oh, really? So then there was a kind of seismic change because till then it was thought British, before the British Mughals, before that nothing. Some religious mumbo jumbo, nothing. I will explain what the Saptanga state theory means, what are the seven elements, and then I will explain each of these elements in theory and in practice. How will I come to the practice part of it? I will come to the practice part of it by using examples from none other than the Mauryans. And that makes a lot of sense because Chanakya or Kautilya was actually associated with Chandragupta Maurya. He was the one who actually picked up Chandragupta as a child, brought him up, and groomed him to be the king of the Mauryans. The entire empire was established by Chandragupta and Chanakya together. So I am going to as examples to help explain the concepts of the Saptanga state theory. So there will be theory and there will be practice. It's a point to note that I'm using the Mauryans because they are very closely associated with Kautilya. But you could use any kingdom, any state. You want to analyze the Chinese? You can. You want to analyze the Cholas? You can. That is the beauty of this theory. Now, before I start, I'm going to give you a kind of tiny introduction to myself, my work, what I do, and that will, kind of will place everything and give it context. So, as Tanya said, I was in the Indian Revenue Service, and after working there for close on 2 decades, I decided that my métier, my passion, my path lay in a different area. So I moved to ancient India. I took up space in modern India. I started writing a book of historical fiction. So I write a historical fiction series called Urnabhi, which is set in Mauryan India. And it's closely associated with what I'm telling you today because when I wrote the book, it was set in Mauryan India. Readers could not understand the background. So, what was the polity all about? What was the politics? What was the plotting, the people, the society, the religion, the clothes, the food, everything? So, there was a glossary, but then I decided to write a series of articles on it. Those articles then turned into a web series. So, right now, I'm making a web series called Maurya, which focuses on the Saptanga state theory and explains everything as per the Mauryans. So, this is the inception of my research into the Saptanga state theory. There is also one very important thing which I would not like any of you to miss. In today's talk, in all the other talks, I will be using a few illustrations. Please look at those illustrations very carefully. My illustrator in my team, we have many members of the team. A very star performer is Vitali Tare, the illustrator. And for each and every illustration, we have gone into the depths of historical research. You are not going to find such images anywhere else because we have gone into texts, sculptures, and all kinds of historical evidence to try and bring it in front of you. So you will see some examples in front of you today. And of course, I would suggest that in greater detail, you can go to my YouTube channel Bharat Kirti and watch the series Model. But now, with the end of this introduction, I will move on to the actual concept of the Saptang state. Now, the Saptang state, why do we need to study it? That's because human beings have lived in agglomerations forever and ever. These agglomerations have become kingdoms, they have become nation states. And humanity has always tried to understand these nation states. So have we, so have Indians. But for some reason, probably because of colonial arrogance and the white man's burden and the idea that Indians are not able to theorize, they have this very fixed idea that Indians are very good at some wishy-washy religious mumbo jumbo, but when it comes to real concepts, when it comes to sophisticated theorizing, Indians are zilch. So that kind of thinking has been so dominant that the Saptang state theory has not received any importance at all. This is the Indian very old concept of the Saptang state. Where does it come from? It can be traced back to our Itihas Puran traditions. It can be traced back to whole generations of scholars. And these generations of scholars have been mentioned in the Arthashastra itself. I am going to talk about Kautilya's idea of the Saptang state, but he is not the one who originated this concept. It's a much older concept. You will find discussions in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata. You will find discussions in various Dharma Shastras, including Manu's Dharma Shastra. You will find discussions across all our Chaturdash Vidyasthans. So this is not a standalone thing. Kautilya is the most important and the most complex explicator of this theory. But this theory belongs to a period far older than his. And we will refer to some of the older generation of rishis and intellectuals who also contributed to the Saptang state theory as far as I am able, because there's a lot of matter. So, don't we need to examine this theory of the origin of the state, this theory of the constituent elements of the state, at least on merits? I am not even saying for the moment that you just throw out everything and start studying the Saptang state. No, let us just examine it on its merits. Let's look at it, understand it, read it in our modern context, read it along with so many other political theories. Why do we ignore it? Why do we pretend that it doesn't exist? That is the academic problem. This whole ignoring of theories which have originated in our own soil, which are very fitted to understand not only ourselves but also the world. Remember, India has always been an outward looking society. It has never been an inward navel gazing society. We have always tried to understand the world. We have been at the center of the ancient trade routes, the Indian Ocean littoral, and we have been trying to understand not only ourselves but the entire world. So let us give this a kind of chance. What is the current idea of the nation state? We are all very much influenced by the Westphalian idea, that 16th century treaty between European Christian kings, where they divided temporal power, sacral power. They decided that one nation, one ethnicity, one religion is what defined the nation. That is not what defines the nation or the kingdom according to our own Kautilyan ideas. But we are very heavily influenced by those Westphalian ideas. In case we want to go somewhere else, then we say, okay, Plato, Aristotle, okay, Hobbes, he said that this is how the state originated. I have had discussions with people who say that Indians have no concept of how the state originated. I'm going to prove them wrong in the next 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you what Kautilya's idea and what actually the Indic idea, indigenous idea of the origin of the state is. Why did it come into being? I'm going to talk about all that. So, it is incumbent upon us in today's world. And why do I say that? Because today's world has suddenly again become a multipolar world. This sounds so much like the polity that Kautilya was talking about, where there were a number of kingdoms and you had to deal with all of them. And one of the constituents is Mitra, which is international relations. And if you go to international relations and if you talk about the time the United Nations was set up, who was one of the biggest theorists? Hans Morgenthau. Now, Hans Morgenthau also had some ideas of what the state consists of. Let me tell you that his idea of the elements of the state, the constituents of the state, are fewer in number, lesser in scope than the idea of Kautilya. So we have to give it a chance. We have to see. And I mean, I'm going to ask for your opinion after we finish all this. Do you think that we can use these theories in any way? I have had discussions with bureaucrats because I'm also a bureaucrat, and without reading anything, they are of the opinion that we do not need to read Kautilya because it's too old. That is not an attitude which is academic. That is not an attitude which is kind of, free and fair, because we need to read something before accepting or rejecting it. So why is it that Hans Morgenthau can be called the ultimate person who understood power and understood realism in politics? I wish somebody would be able to do a kind of comparative study of Hans Morgenthau and Kautilya, and let's see what we come up with. So, this is the background. And this is the reason why we need to study the Saptanga state, because now more than ever, we need to apply, and it is my academic opinion, that the application of Kautilya's Saptanga state theory to today's international politics, as well as today's understanding of the nation state, will lead us to a greater understanding, greater application, and better policy making. So it's not, just for the sake of reading something old, exotic, interesting. No, it's for today. It's for improving our own policy making. It's for improving our own understanding. Okay, so now let's go on to what are the 7 elements of the state. The 7 elements of the state are: the first is Swami or king. The second is Amatya or administration. The third is Janpad or the land and the people. The fourth is Durg, which is the fort. The fifth is Dand, which is the army. The sixth is Kosh, which is the treasury. And the seventh is Mitra, which is allies, and which would mean in modern terms international relations. So Swami for today, for us, it would probably mean the elected leader of our nation. Amatya would mean the administration. Janpad is our country, its geography, its history, its society, its polity, all of it. And in fact, when I have been looking at the Saptanga state and at Mauryan India, most of what I have concentrated on is Janpad, because Janpad is the people and we need to understand the people. Although just understanding the people is not enough, because remember, there are 6 other categories also. So Durg and Dand today, as far as the fort is concerned, a fortification is not one of the first or even second lines of defense in our current scenario today. So we take Durg and Dand, fort and army together, as representing external security, security from external threats and protection for the kingdom. Internal security will come in administration, as I will explain to you, and external security is Durg and Dand. And as far as Kosh is concerned, Kosh is treasury, Kosh is finance, Kosh is the backbone of the entire kingdom. The Arthashastras, remember, about Arth, and Arth is all about money, and Kautilya is all about money. He even says Kosho Mula Danda. So at the basis of everything is Kosh. So the importance of Kosh cannot be underestimated. Then the last one, which is Mitra. Anyone lives in a polity comity of nations. So there are some friends, there are some enemies, some are nearby, some are far off. How do you understand and classify and organize your relations with them? How do you deal with them? How do you deal with those who are your enemies, those who are your friends, those who want to support you, those who are neutral? And this is The genius of Kautilya lies in this Mandal Yoni Shadgunyam theory. And when we do this Prakriti which is Mitra, you will be able to see how beautifully we can use this framework to understand almost any political situation. You want to understand the situation between India, Pakistan, and China? Use Kautilya's theory. You want to understand the relation between China, US, and India? Use Kautilya's theory. And I will take great pleasure in explaining the elements to you and also showing you the way in which things fall into place. To understand something well, you need to know the framework and the structure. Once you have the framework and the structure in place, and you put all the elements together, the patterns throw up a lot of conclusions, the patterns throw up a lot of insights, and they help you to deal with any situation which will arise. So, this is the way in which these seven elements have been also ordered. So, when I say Swami, Amartya, Janpat, then Durg, Dand, Kosh, Mitra, I do not say it randomly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is the order of importance. And this order of importance has been stated by Kautilya. Now, it is not true that all theorists have understood it in the same way. If you read the Mahabharata, it's that something is there in the Shanti Parv. There is also a very interesting discussion between Sulabha and Raja Janak, which is, of course, something in itself which everyone should have read. She also mentions the seven elements of the state, but she mentions them in a different order. So, for her, the importance of these seven elements is different. And when these seven elements are discussed by Kautilya, he talks about them in chapter 6 and in chapter 8. In chapter 6, he tells us, book 6, what are these elements and what are the good qualities of each of these elements. What is the best king? What is the best amartya? So, all those I will tell you about. And then, there is a chapter on calamities. Calamities which befall each of these constituents. Can you see how critical it is for the understanding of your own kingdom as well as the understanding of other kingdoms to know where they are strong and where they are weak and where they can be attacked? Using this is a kind of, you can do a SWOT analysis of these are the elements, so these are the dangers to your finance, these are the dangers to your external security, these are the dangers to your people. So you can do a beautiful SWOT analysis if you read that book on calamities. And when you read that, you also realize that the Saptang state theory had so many other rishis and intellectuals who gave their own opinions on it. And each opinion is considered by Chanakya, analyzed by Chanakya, and then he gives his own conclusion. So it is a beautiful way of understanding the Shastric way of argumentation, of explaining everything that someone else has said. I do not agree with, and I do not agree with this person because of A, B, C, D reasons, and this is my conclusion. So, this whole theory, when you read book 6, book 7, and of course, all of it, comes through as a very well developed, sophisticated, and useful formulation. According to me, I have also a very pragmatic outlook. We should study something only if it is useful. Something you may study because you find Sanskrit beautiful or you may find it interesting, but in the end, if we are to spend time and resources on it, it should be useful. And the Saptang state theory is very useful. Now, I'll just say a couple of words about in which other eras of Indian history can we use this, or have we seen kings who have understood this very well? So there was Shivaji Maharaj. Shivaji Maharaj's administration is said by some people to be a great example of the way the excellence of the second constituent, that is Amartya, that is described by Kautilya. There are extant certain letters from Shivaji to his lieutenants, to his ministers, and In these letters, you can see an explication, a kind of more modern explication of the excellence of administration. Or if you look at the Vijayanagar kingdom and the way the Vijayanagar kingdom was organized. So, therefore, what I want to say is that if we research this, if we think more about this, there are so many other eras other than the modern one, which I will be dealing with in detail, where you can get so much more information and where you can get examples of how this Saptang state theory has actually worked in practice. You know, it gives a very well rounded view because these seven constituents together they make up a holistic view, a 360-degree view of any kingdom, nation, state, or whatever you want to call it. And the names of each of these, Swami or Amatya or Janpad, all these, if I had time, I could consider the etymology. All of them are also very significant. Swami, for example, one of the meanings is the he who gives pleasure or he who gives opulence, he who gives prosperity, that is the king. Amatya, what does Amatya mean? The people who are close to you, who talk to you, who consult with you. So there is ample scope, there is huge scope for research in considering every aspect of this theory and developing it very, very much more. Now, it is perhaps before I move on, I gave you the seven elements of the state, but I did not tell you why did this, according to our own theorists, why did this state come into being? Why do we need this state? Do we need it at all, in fact? Indeed, we do. The idea is that when there is a disorganized mass of people living together, the strong will exploit the weak. The weak will be, under the domination and subject to the whims of the strong. So, therefore, you need one person to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. That is the basic idea of the state, the basic idea of the king. He stands for those who cannot stand for themselves. So, it is to stop Matsya Nyaya. Matsya Nyaya is the law of the fish. The big fish eats the small fish, and the poor small fish can do nothing about it. So it is to stop this Matsya Nyaya that there must be a king, and that is the origin of the first king. Let me just show you. People overwhelmed by the law of the fishes made Manu, the son of Vivasvat, the first king. This is from chapter 1 of the Arthashastra, where Kautilya is explaining the origin of the state. And this is that Matsya, which is at the basis of the ideas of the origin of the state according to Kautilya. Now, having given you an idea of why the state originated, the seven elements of the state, the good qualities of those elements, the calamities that may befall those elements, the use of this particular concept, I will go on to now the first element of the Saptanga state, and that first element is Swami or the king. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that the king is the most important element of all the seven. There is a whole list of good qualities. There is a whole description of, and I can show you. So this is my copy of the Arthashastra, and all this that you can see. Oh, this is full of the long list of good qualities that the Swami must have. So the Swami had to be an absolutely exceptional person. He is the most and important person, and that thing has been misunderstood very, very badly by many Western commentators. So, what do they say? That they say that Indians are incapable of differentiating between the king and the state. They think that the king is the state and the state is the king. The mere existence of the Saptanga state theory disproves this because there are seven elements of the state, not just one element, Swami, but there are seven elements of the state. And one is important, there's absolutely no doubt about it. Kautilya spends a lot of time and energy on explaining how the king is most important because he is the leader. He is the one who gives directions. He is the one who chooses the administration, the amatyas. He is the one who runs everything. So a lot depends on him. There are other rishis and intellectuals, for example, Bharadwaj or Vishlaksh, who have different views on the constituents. They do not agree that the king is most important. But Kautilya is absolutely certain about that. If you read Manusmriti, it's absolutely certain about that. You read the Ramayana, you read the Mahabharata. All of them also point to the fact that they think that the leadership provided by the king, the running of the nuts and bolts, that is done by the king, and that therefore the king is absolutely the most important constituent. Now, I'll give you a little flavor of the kind of qualities that the king must have. And well, don't be too surprised at the very long list. I will tell you some of it in English, and I'll also read some of the Sanskrit shlokas for you. So the king has to be born in a high family. He has to be endowed with good fortune, intelligence, pious, truthful, grateful, liberal, energetic. He has to have the desire to learn. He has to be brave, quick, dexterous, eloquent, bold, full of intellect and strength. The list of personal qualities that the king must have are absolutely legion. So let me read what he says in this chapter, book 6, part 1, is that he says, Tatra Swami Sampat, which means these are the good qualities of the king. And then it goes on and on. Shauryam, Marsha, Shigrata, Dakshyam, Chah, Utsah, Guna. This is just to give you a small idea of the kind of things which are expected from the Swami, who is at the head of the kingdom. In fact, the Swami has to be superhuman in personal qualities. The Swami has to be superhuman in the work that he does, as we will see later. And he has to maintain a very, very high level of excellence. In fact, he has to be probably born with it. So if we go back to the story of Chanakya and Chandragupta, remember, Chanakya, it is said, saw Chandragupta when Chandragupta was playing with a group of friends, and he was pretending to be a king and dispensing justice. He sat there and he listened to what Chandragupta was saying, and he recognized the stellar personal qualities in Chandragupta. And he adopted that boy immediately. And he took that boy and raised him and built upon his good qualities and made him the king. So, personal qualities are extremely important. So, now that we have a king in place, what is he supposed to do? What are the duties of a king? So, the first duty of a king, as you can imagine, is Rakshan, protection. And he has a whole dand for that. So, Rakshan, and then Palan and Poshan and Yogakshem.
Can you tell us which book do you refer to for reading the Arthashastra?
Yes, that's an interesting question, and I would recommend only one. That is R.P. Kangle. There are 3 volumes, one in Sanskrit, one in English, and the third one is a kind of, it gives you all the conclusions. So you must read only R.P. Kangle, and please don't go in for, all kinds of many different things that, for example, Patrick Olivelle or Mark McLeish. I would absolutely not recommend them. Please read R.P. Kangle volume 1 to 3. That is always on my table. And the other one is the Penguin edition of the Arthashastra, which is by L. Rangarajan. That is not a very detailed exposition, but it gives you kind of abstract. Suppose you want to know, okay, how many departments were there in Kautilya's administration. You can refer to it immediately. R.P. Kangle is in detail. It is the exact original, and it's not easy to read. I will agree with that. It's a book I read every day, so for me it's become very easy, but it's not easy to read. So L. Rangarajan is good, but otherwise, please avoid the Olivelles and McLeishes. And I have written many articles on their understanding of the Arthashastra, which is extremely skewed. There is also a translation, the original one, by R. Shama Shastri. So you can also read it. The thing about it is that it is easily available as a PDF on the internet. So you see, this is what I was trying to show you. When the king is chosen, so that Matsya Nyaya does not operate, what do? They assign 1/6 of agricultural produce and 1/10 of commodities and money as the share to this person so that he does all these things. And what are his duties? Here are his duties. Ten Bhrita Rajana Prajanam Yogakshem Avaha. So he has to do palan and poshan, that is care for his subjects. And what is yogakshem? Yogakshem is sustenance, sustaining that which you have achieved. Suppose you have, as a village, you have achieved a great level of agricultural prosperity. Yogakshem is to stay in that situation of prosperity and not to let it all fly away. So it is, I don't know if you remember, LIC has this, its slogan is Yogakshemam Mahamyaham. So they say we protect you. So think of it like that. The king protects everything that you have. And this is what the king is supposed to. These are the duties of the king. I don't know whether all of you have seen this when you read about India as written by other people. There is a kind of really bad impression of Indian kings as if they are autocrats, they are lazy, they are just there to enjoy life. They have ranivasas with thousands of queens and they just do things for their own fun. Nothing could be further from the truth as far as the theory is concerned, and also mostly, of course, they are bad. There were and are bad kings, but mostly nothing could be further from the truth. The king was a very hard-working individual, and the king was not an autocrat. Why was the king not an autocrat? I will talk about that also, but I must end this bit on the duties of the king with just one more thing. So, all of us know about, what do we know about? We know about the welfare state. And the welfare state is, of course, a modern European concept. There is no doubt about the fact that before the Europeans came up with it, nobody ever thought of the welfare of the subjects. Is that really true? Now I am going to show you another shlok from the Arthashastra. Can you see what it says? Praja sukhe sukhe ragyah prajanam cha hite hitam natna priyam hitam ragyah prajanam tu priyam hitam. What does it mean? In the happiness of the subjects lies the happiness of the king, and in what is beneficial to the subjects, his own benefits. What is dear to himself is not beneficial to the king, but what is dear to the subjects is beneficial to him. This is the essence of kingship. This is the essence of Swami. In the 7 elements of the state, this is the essence of Swami. He is there for Rakshan, Palan, Poshan, and for the happiness and welfare of his subjects. And we must never forget this. I am often stunned when I read commentaries on the Arthashastra by Western Indologists. They say, yes, there are some strokes like that, but they're all lies. It's just written there. Nobody used to do that. So there is a complete disregard of the actual theory, to say nothing of the actual practice. When I give you examples of what Chandragupta and Ashok, etc., were like, we will see actual practice of this Praja Sukhe Sukham Ragya. This is what the Mauryan kings believed. This is what they did. And so this is something we must keep in mind, that the welfare of his subjects was the most important thing for the king. Now, I have talked about the bad impression of Indian kings, which everyone has. So, was the king an autocrat? The Red Queen kind of autocrat, off with his head if I don't like him. Absolutely not. Now, why was he not an autocrat? How do we know that? How can we understand that? The first thing is that the king was supposed to follow dharma. And that means dharma and ethics informed the conduct of the king. You remember that Westphalian idea which India has beautifully imported, sacred different, secular different. Indian concepts are not like that. Dharma is not a religion. Dharma is ethics. Dharma is the good path. And that dharma, the king always has to follow. And that dharma will never let him be an autocrat. That dharma means that he always has to think of his subjects and his kingdom before he thinks of himself. Another very important thing, and again, I would ask you to listen carefully. Was the king someone who took unilateral decisions? Okay, I want to attack this king before because I don't like him. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. No. Consultation was another hallmark of the Indian concept of kingship. Who did he consult with? He consulted with the second Prakriti, Amatya, his inner council of ministers and his Mantri Parishad. His inner council of ministers consisted of the Purohit. Remember, he gave him the ideas of Dharma. And apart from the Purohit, there was the Senapati, naturally important for external security. And there was the Yuvraj. And there was also either the Queen Mother or the Queen. So these, and please do note, I'm going to have a separate session on the status of women amongst the Mauryans, but do please note some of these things that I will be saying today about women in the Mauryan period. So the Queen and the Queen Mother were often part of the absolutely inner council of the king. Other than that, he had the Mantri Parishad. I'll talk a great deal about the Mantri Parishad in about 5-10 minutes. So he consulted with them. Therefore, you see the idea of consultation, even though it was Rajtantra and not Ganatantra, has been very much there. I'd just like to tell you a little story. When we came out from the period of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, after that there was the 18 Mahajanpad stories. So there were 18 Mahajanpads that India was divided into. These were the most important political centers. Two of the strongest ones were Magad and Vaishali. Magad was a Rajtantra. Vaishali was a Ganatantra. It was Lichavis of Vaishali, they were a Ganatantra. So which means that they had a kind of proto-democratic setup in which all the members of the Lichavi clan had a say in running that particular kingdom. So there was a long, almost 150-year-old conflict between the Magad and Vaishali. It is during the time of Bimbisar and Ajatshatru of Magad that they actually finally managed to defeat Vaishali. And they defeated Vaishali. There is a absolutely fascinating story of Amrapali, the Ganika of Vaishali, who played a very important role in this fight between Magad and Vaishali. Vaishali lost. Therefore, perhaps the course of Indian history changed and we became a Rajtantra. If Vaishali had won, perhaps we would have been a Ganatantra. And this very important event did leave its echoes. How did it leave its echoes? Because the idea of consultation, the idea of talking to everyone remained. So Ganatantra went away for some time, although it was there in certain pockets, especially in the Himalayan small kingdoms, etc. But normally, over a large part of India, it went away. But it left its echoes in the idea that everyone must have a voice, the voice of the subjects, the voice of the Amatyas, and the king did not take any unilateral decisions. So welfare of the people, his personal qualities, welfare of the people, and consultation. I will be talking much more about consultation in the next section, but keep this in mind. Consultation was another hallmark of the Indian king. It is also said in Indian thought that the king cannot be too much of an autocrat. The king cannot be a dictator. Why? Because the praja will become restive. And there are so many examples of this. Take, for example, the establishment of the Mauryan kingdom. What happened with the Navanandas? The Navanandas were actually excellent administrators. The Nanda dynasty was the one which was before the Mauryans. They were the ones who had really angered Chanakya. And he had decided that he is going to uproot them. And he is going to destroy them. And he did destroy them with the help of Chandragupta. So what was the problem with the Nandas? They were excellent administrators. They also did many kinds of innovations as far as currency and as far as army was concerned. What was the problem? They were deeply unpopular at a personal level because they were very exploitative, and they used to keep the praja very unhappy. So the praja was restive. The praja did not want this kind of raja. And when the praja does not want this kind of raja, it is so much easier to displace him. So if you read the play, which is called, uh, you know, the play which has been written by Vishak Dutt, 5th century, on the way that Chandragupta had come into the throne, and how Chanakya had organized that coup, and how the dissatisfaction within the palace, the dissatisfaction within the city of Patliputra and in the kingdom helped them to overthrow the Nandas. So, this satisfaction and happiness of the subjects with the Swami is yet another very important point which is emphasized, and see how different it is from normally what we think about kings. That the happiness, the satisfaction, the contentment of the people under a king is very important. Otherwise, the king himself becomes weak. The king himself becomes subject to being thrown over, as was the case with when Dhanananda was thrown over by Chandragupta and Chandragupta ascended the throne. Now we have this king in place. He had so many things to do. So how did he do them? If you read about, there is a chapter on the Dincharya of this Swami. And it makes for, it makes me tired just reading it, because his entire day is full. He just gets 4.5 hours to sleep out of 24. He gets up in the Brahm Muhurt, which is about 3:34 in the morning, and he works all the time. He has 4.5 hours to sleep and about 1.5 hours for bathing, etc. Little bit of personal time with his queens. Otherwise, for 16 to 18 hours, he is working hard all the time. And again, I am going to show you some illustrations and sketches of the kind of things that the king did. So when he got up in the morning, can you guess what was the first thing he did? The first thing he did was he used to talk to his spies. He used to talk to his spies because that was the most important thing that the king could do. I again, a kind of aside which we will see later. So I would also again invite you to take a look at the illustration, at the way the king has been picturized, his headdress, all the way what the clothes he's wearing, whatever is around him, because all this has been sourced from the oldest paintings that we have, which is the Ajanta painting. Some of the caves in the Ajanta paintings date back to the 1st century BC, which is the end of the Mauryan Sunda period. So we have traced them from there. We have also read up on what the king used to wear, do, etc. Can you see that many of the spies are women? So these are the things that are important. In fact, I may as well tell you right now that the Mauryan kingdom, the hinge on which the Mauryan kingdom depended was its spy system. Chanakya ran an efficient, huge, and it kind of covered the entire subcontinent. And my book series, Urnabhi, is exactly that. So that Urnabhi is Urnabhi, which is the spider's web of the spy system which Chanakya had all across the country. See, it was a very big kingdom. And he had to keep his eyes and ears open on what is happening all the time. So the first thing the king did was get news. So this is probably like getting up in the morning and reading the news. So the spies would bring news from everywhere, and that's what he would do first of all. Then after that, of course, he had to confer with so many people. He had to confer his with his amatyas. I'm trying to show you again. He's conferring with his amatyas. So he will get information on defense, revenue, expenditure, especially every single day. And this is also done early in the morning. Then, other than that, who else do you think he would meet with? He would also, of course, meet with his Senapati, because Defense is very important. So he would inspect his army every single day. And here is an illustration of how he used to inspect the army every day. So he meets with amatyas, he appoints officials, receives tributes, dispatches letters, confers with spies. He also does some personal contemplation, and then he inspects the army and confers with the Senapati. Now he also meets with his preceptors, which means that he has to talk to his guru. He has to talk with his purohit. He has to meet all of them also every single day. And let me show you an illustration of that. So he is meeting with his guru, purohit, physician, cook. Please note, he used to meet his cook every day also. Not only physician, but also cook every single day. So you see how full the time of the king was, how completely full, and he had to devote all his time to affairs of the state. All of it was devoted to the affairs of the state, and his dincharya was not one which the average person could do very easily. You had to be exceptional. Remember those personal qualities? So this is a picture of the king, the Swami. Now, which Swami shall we talk about when we talk about a Mauryan king? So which Mauryan king do you know the most about? I am almost certain the king you know most about would be Ashok, because Ashok has been belabored by the Indian state which came into existence, I mean the modern one, in 1947 as the ideal of kingship. Things just don't get better than Ashok. I beg to differ. If we have to choose a king who was an exemplar in the modern dynasty, maybe it is Chandragupta or Ashok or Bindusar or Dashrath or Samprati, there were so many. Who do we choose? We choose Chandragupta. Why? One, of course, is the fact that he was the one who established this empire which ran from Afghanistan to almost Madurai, from Chandraketu Gad, which is now Bangladesh, to Saurashtra. Let me show you a map of the Mauryan Empire as it existed. This is the map of the Mauryan Empire. The national capital was at Patliputra. Then there were 4 regional capitals at Takshashila, Ujjaini, Tosali, and Suvamnagari. And the viceroys actually worked on behalf of the king. Can you see how far up above it is? It was near Kabul, and then near Madurai, and then Bangladesh to Saurashtra. So who established it? Chandragupta Maurya. He was the one who established it within the confines of what is now today Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And then he fought with the Seleucid king Seleucus. One in a kind of very bloodless and easy way, and took a lot of the territories of Seleucus back and established Seleucid Mauryan friendship. He was an exceptional person who laid the seeds of the subcontinent, of Bharat Bhumi, of Jambudvip, of India, the political seeds of its unity. In the past, if you want to see a reflection, what are we the echoes of? We are the echoes of the Mauryan Empire. What did Ashok do? He inherited the kingdom from his grandfather, ruled for 60 years, and ran it into the ground. An empire which had been going on strong for 100 years. In 3-4 decades after Ashok's death, it was all done and over with. So Ashok, I'm sorry, no. Chandragupta, yes. What is another reason? Another reason is that the Saptanga state theory that we are doing right now is the one which has been explained by Kautilya. And Kautilya was associated obviously with Chandragupta. So it's much better that way to talk about Chandragupta rather than about Ashok. What is yet another reason? And this is a slightly more nuanced reason. So why is Ashok famous? He is famous because a lot of his edicts have been found. They have been scribbled on rock surfaces, they have been written on pillars, and they have been found in places ranging from Kandahar to Madurai to just across the entire subcontinent. And he was a very grandiose and a person very full of himself. So he would write very grandly about himself. And we seem to have totally bought his story about himself. So these stories are all about how good he was, how much he cared for his praja, all the good things that he did, etc., etc. But where can we trace these precepts from if we talk about, say, welfare? Can we trace it to the Arthashastra? Of course we can. So the so-called much wanted edicts of Ashok, which showed the exemplary nature of him as a king, all of them are hoary old Indic indigenous concepts, which are understood in this peculiar narrative to have suddenly sprung up when Ashok became the king. He suddenly had this brainstorm and he suddenly became totally concerned about the welfare of his subjects. Nobody else had ever cared. None of the kings who had gone before Ashok had ever cared. But Ashok suddenly had a brainstorm and he decided that, yes, I'm going to do all these things. Do a comparative study of the edicts on one side and the Arthashastra on the other, and you will be able to very easily trace. I have done a bit of this exercise and noted down the shlokas in the Arthashastra from where the edicts can be traced. So you see the concepts and theories which are explained at length in a very grandiose and personalized kind of way. I, Ashok, I, Piyadasi. So, in a very, very narcissistic kind of way explained by Ashok. All of them are nothing but basic concepts of kingship, basic concepts of the state as far as indigenous theory is concerned. So I think over here I can end with the example of Chandragupta, because Chandragupta exemplifies the personal qualities. He ruled with dharma, he ruled with consultation. We have some inscriptions and edicts about his amatyas also. He ruled according to the way we have understood the theory of kingship to be in the Arthashastra. So this is as far as the first element of the seven armed state is concerned, that is Swami. And I hope that it's all very clear and easy for you. And anyway, we have a Q&A session, I guess. Now we come to Amatya. So what is Amatya? Amatya is the ministers of the king, the inner council, as I had told you, as well as the Mantri Parishad. So who would these Amatyas be? Is there any specific description of who they should be, what their quality should be, how they should be appointed? It is astonishing to note the detailed description of how Amatya should be actually picked up, how they should be tested, what their conduct rules should be, how they should act, what they should do, what they should not do. Everything is given in great detail. And the only pity is that, 20 minutes, even 20 hours is not enough to explain all that. But I would definitely suggest that if any of you are motivated enough, then reading the chapters on Amatya would be a very, very interesting way of comparing administration as it runs today. The tests that we have to get our administrators on board and the kind of tests that they had, it could be a very kind of very interesting description. Now, I'm going to show you another shlok about the qualities of an Amatya. What are the qualities of an Amatya? So, Sattva, Pragya, Vakya Shakti, Sampanna Nam. So these people who wish to be Amatyas must have Sattva, truth, Pragya, intelligence, spirit, intelligence, Vak Shakti, the power of expression. And these are the kind of people who have to come to be, to apply for becoming an Amatya, because becoming an Amatya was not automatic. Do you know that they had tests? You had to take a test to be an Amatya. What kind of test? Of course, Shastrik test. So our own Chaturdash Vidyasthanam, they had to be experts in that. And they were tested on their knowledge. They were tested on their knowledge, and then only were they allowed to become Amatyas. They had to have integrity. They had to have loyalty. And there is a long description of different rishis say different things about what kind of people should the Amatyas come from. Should they be old friends of the king? Should they come from the most important families? Should only their qualities be seen and nothing else be seen? So, how many should there be? On all these, I mean, for example, Kautilya says there is no need to put down a number. Just have the number of amatyas that is necessary, which makes sense because you cannot say in advance how many people you're going to need until and unless you know the size of the kingdom, the complexity of its working, etc. So, to all aspirants for state service, they had to be learned in the Shastras, they had to be ready to give a test of their knowledge. Then, once they were chosen, they also had a very elaborate rule of conduct. So, there is a full chapter in the Arthashastra, that's chapter 5. It's all about the rules of conduct that the officials had to follow. It's called Yoga Vrittam, this chapter, and it is the conduct of officials. So it was not a kind of very free and easy thing. One, of course, you had to take a test, and the other thing is that once you were chosen, you have got to read those rules of conduct. You have to be so smart. The Amatya, he has to understand how the king is feeling. Is the king happy? What kind of advice does he need? If the king is doing something wrong, how do I advise him? What do I do? Suppose he is taking a wrong decision, then what is the duty of the Amatya? How should the Amatya approach this? All those things are given in this, not only in this Yoga Vrittam, but also in the chapter on calamities. Because if a calamity befalls a king, which means something goes wrong with him, then it is the duty of the Amatya to correct it. So, therefore, these Amatyas had to be really on the ball and they had to read whatever was happening around them very, very expertly and very, very intelligently. There were four kinds of tests that they had to also undergo after being appointed. This was a kind of continuous testing. What were these tests? This was one was Dharmopadha, one was Arthopadha, Bhayopadha, and Kamopadha. What do these mean? That they were given different kinds of blandishments. So, offer money, that is Arthopada, to revolt against the king and see does this person actually take money and revolt against the king? If he does, of course, and he is dismissed and maybe he will be removed from the sent away from the country, etc. Definitely dismissed from service. Then there was this Kamopada, which is called the love test. So you send a woman, what we call a honey trap today. So that kind of honey trap was actually, it is quite a favorite of the Arthashastra and of Chanakya because women were a very important part of the administration and especially the spice. So this Kamopada was also a very important part. Then there was Bhayopada, which means scare an Amatya or a Senapati into doing something. So would one of these administrators be so foolish or fearful that he would go against his king? So all these things were checked out. Now, these are, I told you about the theory of the administration. Now, I am going to tell you about how it is described in terms of structure. What was the structure? So, the king was at the top. And after the king, there were four viceroys. We've just seen the four viceroys that were there in practice in the Mauryan kingdom. In the Arthashastra, theoretically, it is mentioned that there should be four sthaniks. So I think there are parallels, although perhaps a straight line cannot be drawn between the sthaniks and the viceroys, but there are definitely parallels. As far as this administration is concerned, under the sthaniks were gopis. These gopis looked after a group of villages. Inside the villages, there were the gram vriddhas, and there were the village chiefs, the headman, the gramik. So there was a gramik and a gram vriddha. What does this remind you of? A proto panchayat, of course. So there were different levels of administration at the gop level, at the village level, at the vice-regal level, and at the central level. And different subjects were dealt with at these different levels. So like normal, defense, external affairs, currency, etc. were dealt with by the king. But other smaller affairs were dealt with at different levels. And there is a chapter in the Arthashastra called the Dharmasthiyam, which gives you a list of what was dealt with at which level. So there was a very well organized system of dealing with subjects. And this is the kind of concentric levels of loyalty, this kind of idea of nationhood is very different from the Westphalian one, because it takes into account your village loyalty, your regional loyalty, as well as your central loyalty. So you see, this is the kind of thing that we need, because we are people with multiple and diverse loyalties and personalities which all coalesce into one. And somehow the Westphalian system does not understand how that all these can be complementary and they need not fight with each other. They meld into each other. So this was the way it was done. Another note is that the king had palace guards. The chief of the palace guard was called the Dawari. And I have an interesting bit for you regarding the Antarvanshika. So, who was the Antarvanshika? She was the chief of the king's personal guards. And did you notice the pronoun I used? She. The head of the king's guards were always, but always women. And this has been set down in the Arthashastra as a precept. The idea perhaps is that women are far more loyal than men. And if you read say if you read Bhas, Bhas was the most popular playwright of the modern period. So if you read Bhas and you just take a look at all these things, in his descriptions too, in all the palaces that he describes of kings and courtiers, the head of the palace guards, the head of the courtiers' houses, personal security, they are always women. That's something which it is difficult to digest, because women are not supposed to be security givers, they are supposed to be abalas who will actually ask for security rather than give security. But here, the situation was such that it was women who were the first and last and final arbiters of the security of the Swami. This is also something worth remembering. Now, so we have the central administration in place. We have the king's guards. We have the palace guards. Now let's look at, say, the Council of Ministers. So there were two towering figures. One was the Sannidhatri and one was the Samahartri. I'll start with the Samahartri. The Samahartri was a kind of mixture of Home Minister and Finance Minister. He was responsible for the budget, the revenue, expenditure. He was also responsible for internal security. He was responsible for all the departments, the different adhyakshas, which I will tell you about. He was responsible for all of them. And so this was a mixture of Home Minister as well as Finance Minister. This was the Samahartri. Who was the Sannidhatri? The Sannidhatri was the person who was responsible for the actual goods. So, those days it was not all digital currency and crypto coins and etc. So it was all real things: gems, gold, jewelry, wood, animals, furs, those kind of things. And they had to be kept in storehouses. So the Sannidhatri was responsible for these koshagrihas. There was a network of them across the country. He was responsible for them. He had to make them, construct them, establish them, and be responsible for their security. He also had to have a secret storehouse known to nobody except the king to keep things for special calamities or for special occasions. And to keep an eye on all this, who did we have? We had a comptroller and auditor general who was called the Akshapatal Adhyaksh. So on July 31st of every year, I'm telling you this in terms of modern dates, the dates given are different. On July 31st of every year, the accounts of the entire kingdom had to be completed, got to the center, and then the Akshapatal Adhyaksha and his entire department would check whether all those accounts were correct or not. So there was a system of checks and balances. The Samahartri also kept one spy or a few spies in each department so that he could see that all these departments are functioning properly. So there were many types of storehouses. I'm just going to give you a list of all the departments which are there in the Arthashastra. So there are 33 departments mentioned in the Arthashastra. I will just show you a list. So there's an elephant department, treasury, mining, metallurgy, metals, mint, surveyor, textiles, alcoholic beverages, courtesan, shipping, etc. So you see, these 33, these are the different departments. These are the departments that were divided as per the economy of that time. These would not all, apply to us today, although some would. Chief controller of shipping, ports, harbors, cavalry, elephants. No, I don't think so. I doubt if elephants have any importance at all. But at the time, elephants were a very large part of the national wealth because elephants were very important for war. They were very important for doing a lot of work in the forest, etc. And they were special animals. So elephants were very, very important in ancient India and also in modern India. If I had more time, I could tell you many stories of ancient Indian elephants, but perhaps some other time. So these were the departments. So when Seleucus and Chandragupta they met, they had a fight. What Seleucus wanted was that the northwestern parts, Punjab and Takshashila around that, he wanted those parts of Chandragupta's empire for himself because he was a descendant. He was the one who took over from Alexander. So he thought that Alexander of Macedon had those territories under him, so they must be under me. Seleucids were a huge empire in Asia. Mauryans were a huge empire in India. And there was a certain Hemvat Marg, which was a very important trade route, which both of them wanted to control. So they had to obviously fight with each other. How did this fight happen? My second book, Urnagi 2, is going to be released in a couple of months. If you want details of how this fight happened, which spies went where, how different kingdoms of Egypt and Lysimachia, etc., how did all these come into play, read the book. But in short, Seleucus and Chandragupta met on the banks of the river Kubha, which is near Kabul. And what did they do? They entered into a treaty. All the skirmishing, guerrilla warfare, etc., whatever had to happen, happened before that. Then they entered into a treaty. What was that treaty? They entered into a marital alliance and elephants. Chandragupta gave 500 elephants to Seleucus. And Seleucus took those elephants back to him, back to his own kingdom. And you may have heard, those of you who are enthusiastic about European history, about Hannibal and his elephants and the Punic Wars. So, it is most probably true that the wars, the Punic Wars, Hannibal's elephants were descendants of those elephants that Chandragupta had given to Seleucus when the two had entered into a treaty. So this is one story of elephants, and there are so many others, because an elephant was, well, maybe if you have a fleet of Mercedes today, so if you had an elephant then, it was like having a fleet of Mercedes and a mansion and a swimming pool and what have you. So the elephants were the last word in being rich and showing off your richness. You were a private person, and if you were the king and if you were the Rajya, then of course it was also something which you seriously needed. It was something which was useful. It was not just for show, but it was also very useful. Uh, Now I have spoken to you about these different departments. There were 33 of them. Each of these departments had heads. These heads worked with a group of people. So they were kind of three levels. There were the Yukt, then there were the Upayukt, and then there were the Tatpurush. So let me show you an illustration of how they would have worked, how an Adhyaksha's office would have worked. So you can see this big figure over here, he is the Adhyaksh. Then this person who is writing, there were many different kinds of second level workers. This one is the chief. Then you had lekhaks. You can see a lekhak over here, the one who's writing. There is a Rup Darshak. There is a Sankhyak. There is a Nivigrahak. And there is an Uttarabhyaksh. And all of them have different roles to play. So you can see things are coming in. Some people are counting them. Some are writing. Some are checking the quality. All these people did different things, and this was how these departments were organized. How each of the Adhyakshas worked. This was how this was organized in all these 33 departments. The departments, of course, depend on the way the economy was then. And today, of course, we'll have to keep in mind that all these departments will be very, very different and there will be so many new ones. Now, you may well ask me, of what use was this entire complicated system? Why? because the Mauryans were a behemoth empire. They were a huge empire. I've just shown you the extent. And they, for them, trade, which means trade not only along the entire length and breadth of the country, but trade with Southeast Asia, China, that means this side Asia, and on the other side with the Gulf countries, and via that to Europe with African countries. India was sitting at the center. For many years now, maybe 50, 60, 100 years, things have shifted to the Pacific Ocean. Earlier, action was in the Indian Ocean. Where are all the ancient empires of the world located? If you just open the map of the Indian Ocean littoral, check out all the ancient empires. They are all along the Indian Ocean littoral. And India was sitting right in the middle. The Mauryans were controlling trade. Remember, I told you their argument with the Seleucids was also because they wanted to keep control of the major land route. So they had land routes, they had sea routes. Then they had to, therefore, have a bureaucracy to control this trade. They levied customs duties, they levied taxes. So they had to collect all these taxes. They ran ships, they had ports and harbors, they ran caravans, so they had satvahaks. And I must mention that there were 18 important guilds. These guilds were like proto corporates. So, the textile guild would be the everyone who was in the textile business. Then there would be a gems and gold guild, that kind of. But guilds in themselves are a huge topic. So I really can't say much about them right now. But to run this complex economic machinery needed this behemoth system of bureaucracy. And they also had, see, it is said that the prosperity of the Mauryans depended on three things. One was trade, the other was agriculture. They had developed agriculture, irrigation systems, and development of the amount of produce that was able to be got from the land jumped during the Mauryan period, mostly because they had wonderful waterworks and irrigation systems. Again, I wish I had time to explain to you. Some of the irrigation systems of the Mauryans survive to this day. And we have inscriptions which tell us when Chandragupta and his viceroys had this particular waterworks made. And it is a fascinating study on its own. So, agriculture with the basis of irrigation and waterworks, canals, lakes, artificial irrigation, etc. And the last thing was the army. So all this was underwritten. The security was underwritten by the army. So you had to have a bureaucracy to control all this. Now you may also ask me that I've been telling you all kinds of things. So how do you know it's true? From where do you, if you want to know about it or if you want some evidence, where do you get it? So the evidence lies in inscriptions, in texts, in so many remains. Like I told you, in Saurashtra, there is an inscription of Rudra Daman, which gives you a description of how Chandragupta and his viceroy Pushyagupta actually made that particular Sudarshan lake, because that place was going through a kind of water scarcity, water paucity. So they had that man-made lake made to provide water for drinking and irrigation. So if you go in for reading the edicts and the descriptions of the different things, if you get kind of ignore all the grandiosity and narcissism of Ashok and actually read what he's writing, so he talks about all these departments, the ones I have mentioned, the works done by them. Then there have been other inscriptions found in different, maybe on stone vases or on copper plates, etc., which talk about the different departments of the kingdom. So there is evidence to show that the theory which has been written in the Arthashastra had a parallel in the practice that was there during the Mauryan period. So that is as far as evidence is concerned. This whole thing is a vision of Chanakya. It is the vision of Kautilya. And the intelligence and vision of Kautilya is difficult to understand. It cannot be understood. The Arthashastra is like an encyclopedia of ancient India. Nothing is above his vision and nothing is below his vision. He will tell you how much to eat every day. He will also tell you how to fight with the neighboring king. He will tell you what clothes to wear, what jewelry to wear, everything. So, looking into the mind of Kautilya via the Arthashastra is an absolutely fascinating experience. Why do I mention Kautilya? Because I'm talking about administration, Amatya. And Kautilya was the Amatya par excellence. You cannot get better than that. The stories about him also are absolutely legion. He is mentioned in Jain and Buddhist sources. He's also mentioned in the Brihat Katha Manjari, Katha Sarit Sagar. And you know that these 10th, 11th century Sanskrit plays are actually based on a 6th century BCE Prakrit work called the Badkaha. So it is part of art history. The stories of the Badkaha, that itself is lost. They are part of our history. Then we also have Greek sources. You may have heard of the Indica of Megasthenes. So the Indica itself is lost, but other Roman and Greek writers such as Strabo, Justin, etc., have given us excerpts from that. So in those are mentioned very clearly. For example, in the Indica, one of the extracts, it's mentioned very clearly how the city of Patliputra is organized. And when you see, there's a department of weights and measures mentioned in the list of departments. So that extract also mentions that there is a department of weights and measures. There is also a department of coins. There is also a department of measuring water and irrigation. So if you see Greek sources, then too you get a lot of pointers about how in practice many of these theoretical things would have actually worked. So there you have it. You have the Swami who is aided by Amatya or administration in a huge nation state with very complex economic, cultural, and social activity. I've been talking more about administration and economy today, but in the next talk, I will be talking about Janpad, and then we will get into the nuts and bolts of how the people lived and what kind of bureaucracy was there. Even in that, they left nothing alone. The Mauryans just left nothing alone. They taxed everything, they listed everything, they categorized everything, and they organized everything. So we will see how in the next time we'll be talking about Janpad, and we'll see. I think for the next two talks, I want to talk about Janpad. I think that's the way I organize it because it's a very complex topic. But for now, Saptanga state and the first two elements, Swami and Amartya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumedha ji, for that really enlightening and analytical talk that you have given, which makes us feel even more proud of our ancestors. Apart from that, when you spoke about the elephant story, I remember reading one story like this on the internet. It says that when Alexander came and he tried to attack Puru, yeah, the king. So the first image he saw of Porus was there was this huge elephant, and standing on his head was 7 foot tall Porus. So it was a awe. He was in shock for about 5 to 10 minutes, looking at that image only of a huge elephant and a 7 foot man standing on top of it.
That was the thing about elephants, they struck awe into the hearts of everyone who saw them because they were so big and huge. So that's why the position of elephants in ancient India.
Also in the Rig Veda, during the Dashrajanya war, they mention about a whole governance system of Gramin and Grammar. So we had this governance system since the ancient Rig Vedic times, which kept changing. So that is so wonderful that speakers like you are, going into this space and letting us know, being in the practical domain for so many years in the bureaucracy. So in the links for all the audience members, I've dropped links of the books recommended by Sumedha ji to read on the Arthashastra. I've also dropped Sumedha ji's contacts on Twitter and Facebook, and also the book Urnibhi by Sumedha ji on espionage and adventure and seduction in the Amorian tale, which is very interesting.
Watch Morello. It's on YouTube, Bharat Kirti channel. Watch it. And you'll get, because I spend one episode on everything, so you'll get everything in greater detail.
Yes, I've dropped the link of Sumedha ji's channel as well in the links. Please do go through all of them and please explore them.
Namaste, Sumedha ji, and namaste to everyone. First of all, what wonderful work you have done. Absolutely hats off. मतलब बहुत काम किया इस पे आपने. It's really a great achievement, and we are truly grateful. That is what I would like to say for all your work and also for this very illuminating talk. I wanted to share something which I had read about in a short sort of extract of Arthashastra written by, I think, two techies a few years ago. I forget their name. It was a small sort of book and very interesting, where they talked about how Chanakya actually spoke about how inherently corrupt Indians were. He actually talked about it, which connects to all those things that you're saying, the spies. So he said you have to constantly watch for what they're doing. They're doing any hera pheri, in their accounts, in this, that. So he actually had an eye on everything. He was on the ball with regard to all these things. And it's like truly admirable.
So did you read what he actually says about bureaucrats? He says just like fish in water, you don't know how much water they've drunk. So like that is what a bureaucrat is like. He is there. And
yes.
what he is eating, you don't know.
You don't know. So there's got to be a watch kept on them.
Finally, the Samahartri had one group of spies in each of these departments so that you get corruption. And there are separate 2 chapters on corruption, which I will pick up.
This is what was sort of summarized in this book. And I really laughed when I read it, because even way back then, he analyzed the psychology of Indians, which is not just Indians, also South Asians, as they generally believe, the tendency towards corruption. That apart, that is one point. And of course, we have so much to be grateful for to Chanakya. But what exactly happened during the Mughal times, I may be wrong, you have done all the research on this, and please do, enlighten us. Did the Mughals, any of the kings, ever look into these, works, or were they inspired by anything of Chanakya? 1. 2, did the British bother? And 3, what about well-read people like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? Did he ever consult this before framing our constitution, which I'll be very frank to say that it's not really a constitution which represents the majority of the people, to be very honest. And do you have any information whether Ambedkar, because he was so well read, that did he ever go back to, checking?
A background on what people actually used to think of the Arthashastra. So Mughals, no, because they came from a completely different cultural context. They had absolutely no connect with this land and absolutely no connect with the ideas that came out of this land. In fact, this whole corruption idea was institutionalized by that Nazrana business. By, offering those kinds of things to anyone who's your boss or anyone from whom you want something, you go offer Nazrana. So it is a totally different thing. Chanakya wants to stamp out corruption. The Mughals wanted to use it. The more they get out of it, the better for them. So no, absolutely not. And your second question about the Arthashastra, see, what happened was that for a great number of years, say turn of the century after the Muslim invasion, a lot of our indigenous texts were submerged. So during the colonial times, what was it said? That these are lost. They were not lost because there were people who were reading them. It was just that it was not in English and it was not in the mainstream. So in 1909, that R. Shama Shastri found a manuscript at the Oriental Research Institute in Mysore. Then he published it in 1909 in Sanskrit by collating a lot of other manuscripts, and he did a lot of work on it. In 1915, he published a translation. When he published a translation, it was the first time that anybody in the Western world thought that, oh, okay. So they also thought about political science. Oh, they had some theory about economics. They used to levy customs duties. Oh, really? So then there was a kind of seismic change, because till then it was thought British, before the British Mughals, before that nothing. Some religious mumbo jumbo, nothing. So there was admittedly a kind of sea change, but it did not enter the mainstream of academia. I am not at all aware of any writings of Dr. Ambedkar on Arthashastra. And the reason for this, there is a IDSA, that is the Defense Research, Manohar Parrikar Defense Research Institute. So IDSA for the past few years has been trying to look at indigenous areas of knowledge for the military. So the Arthashastra is full of that. We'll be doing that too. So there was a seminar on that, and there was a discussion on why. Other than that, being a bureaucrat, I have interacted with bureaucrats in RAW. Now, Kautilya was an expert on espionage. Why are none of his tenets used? Why are none of his things used? So the reasons they gave is, one, at the time of independence, there was this hatred for everything that was old and ancient and Indian. So it was, it was bad and let's forget about it. And it's Brahminical and we don't want to read Brahminical texts and it's all useless. It's all old. And I have got this also from serving bureaucrats and talking to people who are in RAW, for example. One of them read my book and he was struck by the espionage in it. So I told him, this is from Kautilya. What stopped you from reading it? So no, it's too old and it's too useless. So there was this whole baggage, this whole mental baggage that, Mr. Nehru, young India, modern India, it's not going to look back. Never mind if there are some useful things that we can get if we look back and we can adapt them for ourselves. No, we are not going to look back. And Deepanjali, I'm very struck by what you're saying, that before framing the constitution, did we read all this? No, we did not. Because we basically cut pasted the 1935 GOI Act. So, of course, we didn't read all this. If we did, a lot of things would be different.
Thank you for the response. I know that we didn't read. My doubt was because Dr. Ambedkar was so well read, did he ever refer to it? Very interesting that you mentioned that.
Blind spots, I guess, Deepanjali.
It is. We are paying the price for it, clearly. Anyway, thank you. Thanks for your...
So, do we need to read this, Sumedha ji, Chanakya Niti?
We don't read the Chanakya Niti. It's a kind of false thing. It's a medieval document made up by I don't know who. Please do not read the Chanakya Niti Shastra. It's full of a lot of rubbish. It's a misogynist kind of text. In each and every shlok, every other shlok, you have something against women. Please don't read that. Read the Arthashastra and you will only learn good things.
Thank you, Sumedha ji, for clearing that. A lot of confusion in people's minds regarding Chanakya Niti and Chanakya. So that's a big no-no.
Big no-no. Okay, don't waste your time. One note, if you want to read aphorisms, small ones, read the Panchtantra. The Panchtantra is nothing but a restatement of the Arthashastra in simple and easily understandable ways. So if you really want to read, and there are some apt, pithy aphorisms in the Panchtantra which it will give you pleasure to read. So read the Panchtantra.
I was waiting for your, your talk on that part where the Kautilya, describes about the security of the kings and all. I had read long back, and then I saw a photo of Colonel Gaddafi, surrounded by the lady guards, and that struck me a very hard. That we in India we had forgotten, but probably I don't know, probably by the force of psychophancy, Colonel Gaddafi had done that. Well, that's besides the point. My question would be like, you see, I'm of a belief that if India is to become Bharat, if you understand what I mean, there has to be a second republic, and that republic has to be based on Indian ethos, which is very beautifully described in Kautilya's Arthashastra. From your experience as an administrator and your personal experience and other experiences, do you see that happening in near future?
Absolutely not, because our entire education system teaches us nothing except whatever is regurgitated by the Western academia. Did you know that there were 7 elements of the state? Were you taught Swami Amartya Janpad anything in school, in college? Was I taught? No. I studied different subjects. I'm also a student of sociology. So was I taught anything Indian in my sociology course in Delhi? No, except of course one thing, that wonderful favorite of everyone, the caste system. India is nothing but the caste system. So I spent 2 years in the Delhi School of Economics. 1 year was only caste system. But anything else, all the other traditions of the other different knowledge traditions, I was not taught. Nobody is taught. What do we do? Montessori system. So what do we look at? Some 10 plus 2 plus 3 system. We do not have indigenous education. So nothing like this, Lalitji, is going to happen. Do not hold your breath. Until and unless we change our education system, nothing is happening. Because we simply do, and the kind of things I'm doing or some people like us, they're not enough. There has to be a concerted effort to bring all these Vidyasthans back. Now, I am trying it myself. I'm also a teacher, and I teach Shastric sociology, which is a mixture of modern sociology and Shastric knowledge. So that's the need of the hour. We cannot and should not throw out contemporary education or Western education, but we should definitely go back to our roots and see what is the kind of education that will be useful for us and try and merge it in some new system which comes, I do not see it coming, not for the next decade. All of us, we are all, whether it is Sangam Talks or whether it is me or whether it is others, we are engaged in doing our little bits. But are these little bits enough? No, they're not. We still don't have critical mass. So a lot of work needs to be done, and it has to start with education. There is no other way.
So, like Sangam Talks is doing a very good job in uniting all these people. What extra could be done to amass that critical mass you were talking about?
I think what needs to be done is to have a very strong review of education policy and the content of education. And there first has to be some kind of commission set up which will compare the Chaturdash Vidyasthanam and +4 with the modern system of education, draw parallels and draw up a syllabus. And then once that syllabus is drawn up, then there should be consultation about how we can actually connect and coordinate it with modern science, with modern education, etc. So all this cannot be done at a private level like us. It has to be done by the state.
Yes, Sumedha ji, such wonderful work that you are doing. I just have a question because I don't know how often you've spoken or given presentations on this. But has there been any attempt made by anyone to help you advocate this in schools, in colleges? At least little snippets of information. Are you planning?
Yes, that is happening. Yes, and in fact, I have just been asked by ICHR to collaborate with them. Sorry, not ICHR, ICCR, the Indian Council of Cultural Relations. So yes, I think they are tiny sprouts, tiny green leaves. Let's see when they become a tree. And I'm also in touch with Doordarshan because this web series that I'm making, they want to broadcast it, but Doordarshan is a bureaucracy and not a Kautilyan bureaucracy, but a modern Indian one, very tough to negotiate. So I'm still in kind of talks with them, but do expect sometime a well-mounted big Hindi edition of all the things that I'm speaking about right now.
Because I think this to take the discussion forward, what you mentioned about the bureaucracy is absolutely correct. We have a bureaucracy, unfortunately, that does not represent the people at all. Believe me, this is something I've always felt. The bureaucracy doesn't.
They're to stop you rather than to let you do something.
And they don't respect the cultural traditions also of people. They just go by these. We have foreign laws. There's no doubt about that. Often many of our laws are totally contradicting the way people live, in terms of our culture. I'm not talking broader things like discrimination and things like that. That's different. But our bureaucrats especially need this training. So what would be great actually is if you could get this into the curriculum of the training of UPSC as in for IAS officers.
Absolutely. That's the kind of thing one tries, to get it into RAW or to get it into, but if somebody from LPSNA was listening to us, they would roll around the floor and laugh. That's the impression and that's the idea they have of Kautilya or Arthashastra. So they would, just give you the horse laugh and walk away. So we are not at that stage yet.
Yeah, which is it's a pity.
Everyone is ignorant. If I were to talk to anyone about Kautilya, they would know nothing, but they know that they have to laugh at it.
But if I may add that especially since last year's lockdown and Doordarshan putting out all these old serials, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and also I believe Chandragupta Maurya, there was a huge revival. Suddenly I was reading in places that young people...
Panjali, please don't talk to me about television serials.
And they had an interest in Chandragupta Maurya. I know it won't be correct. It's not authentic. Many things would be wrong.
I am absolutely and completely anti such serials. They spread misinformation.
Yes, that's true.
And Chandragupta Maurya, the serial, it gives me fever. Please don't talk about it. If I could, I would just, stop all these people from making these absolutely historical.
True, I agree. There's a lot of distortion. I agree. But what I'm saying is, among the public, there is an interest to know. They want to know. And there is Chandragupta Maurya is an interesting character also because of the caste element, because he wasn't a Kshatriya.
Yes, and that is what I have noticed in all my talks in India, Europe, USA. There is a huge desire to know.
Huge.
There is no doubt about that. And maybe, that will be the catalyst which will make everything move forward.
And I think especially among the young, that's why I mentioned the first point that, if this can go to schools and colleges, and just...
You will be interested to note that I teach a course on Kautilya's Arthashastra and Saptang states to small children.
Oh, very.
I just finished the first one last month.
So good to know. Thank you for doing this, and it's a real service to the nation. Thank you.
And they are bright, smart, interested children, and I have great hopes from them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have classes for adults as well?
I can.
Sociology
If you are interested and you contact me and I get a group of 15, I can have classes for adults also.
Okay, because you mentioned Shastric sociology.
Yes. So that is a proper, it's a degree course in a college in Pune.
All right. So it's wonderful. It's heartening to hear that you're actually documenting this. You're saying it will be available in Hindi and English in a book format, whatever Maurya Lok series you're doing. I've dropped links for that in the chat. Please go and explore that channel by Sumedha ji. Bharat Kirti is Sumedha ji's channel. And even if you go to YouTube and just type in Maurya Lok series, you'll get the channel's links there and you can watch it from episode 1. So I've dropped the links there. Please do go and connect. And apart from that, Sumedha ji, I have one question. The concept of nation state that we have today is not commensurate to what our ancient system of the state was. And the nation state is more applicable to the European and these unions where there's one culture, one religion, and one state. So it's being thrust upon us. Where do you think there's a solution to this?
The solution to this will have to be very wide-ranging. We are a democratic country. If people, all of us, if we wanted to change, and if we start a movement for this kind of change, then only can it happen. Right now, today, we have a constitution. Now, in a democratic country, the constitution is supreme. So we have to follow it whether we like it or not. If we want to change the constitution, then we have to, all of us, start a movement. Perhaps there can be a referendum on that. Perhaps a new constitutional constituent assembly or constitution commission can be set up. I am of the opinion that this should happen sooner rather than later, because the kind of pulls and pushes and the non-applicability of the constitution to so many issues in this country is very obvious. But again, remember, we are a democracy and it cannot be done except by following due democratic process. For that due democratic process, I think what we can do is get awareness. Get awareness so that people are interested, so that people ask for change. And when in a democracy people ask for change, that change always comes. And I think that is the only way it can be done. It cannot be some kind of top-down or some group thinks that, okay, this should be changed and that should be changed. It cannot be like that. It has to be a popular movement. A new constituent assembly should be set up. And the terms of reference of that should be very carefully crafted. It's a huge task, Tanya. And, I don't see it happening right now.